So, this very embodiment, the subject, the subject of the whole existence. Subject is not just a thought. Subject is everything. So that subject, which is the light of the whole existence, physical existence, being taken for a little form, the unlimited being taken for, the all-comprehensive being taken for confined, for being confined to a form. See, the comprehensive is mistaken. The space is all comprehensive and says, I am locked up in this spot. This is called the all comprehensive. It views itself as confined. Aparichinnam is seen as parichinnam. Aparichinnam is seen as parichinnam. Aparichinnam is seen as parichinnam. This adhyasa, this is something, the distinction between the subject and object is absolutely self-evident, and yet I don't look at it, therefore I get confused, mixed up. The subject is mixed up with the form. It was mixed up. Therefore, instead of figuring out the relation between me and the rest as the subject and object, I conclude, I live with the thought, I am an object. I am a conscious object relation. I live with the idea of myself having conscious object relation. Not a pure conscious being and the object relation. You see? So my conscious identity has got mixed up, as it were, it is totally mixed up with the form, and therefore I live with the idea I am a conscious object and the rest is also inert object. The rest is inert object, I am a conscious object. I am a conscious object, the rest is inert object, thus the conscious object relation. And in this object-object relationship, it is total illusion, because the all-comprehensive me looks like confined with the form, and the form is dependent upon other forms. Therefore I say I am also dependent upon other things. This form is dependent upon the rest of the creation. This form depends upon the rest of the creation. This form is located in the rest of the creation. And the rest of the form is sustains this form. And if I look at myself as this form and say I am totally ever dependent upon these elements, this saga of samsara begins. That the samsara is a confusion, struggle is a confusion, because our identity, felt identity is a confusion. The limited identity is a total confusion, and that it is a confusion is also self-evident. But why do we require Shastra? Shastra comes and says, yes, see, your confusion is that you are living a confusion is self-evident. The subject is mixed up. Thus, Atma, this adhyasa itself is called avidya. Manyante tadvivekena cha vastu swarupa avadharanam vidyamahuhu. Correcting this vidya, correcting this avidya, correcting this adhyasa is called really vidya. Tatraivam sati yatre dadhyasaha tat kritena doshena gunena va anumatrena visana sambadhyate. When it is so, very beautiful, when it is so, means what? That I am the form is only adhyasa, not a fact. When it is so, यत्र यद अध्यासः, जहाँ जो इम्पोज किया जाता है, यत्र यद अध्यासः, जहाँ जो इम्पोज किया जाता है, तत्कृतेन दोषेण गुणेन वा, उसकी वर्च्यू और वाइस से, इट्स लिमिटेशन, इट्स फ्लॉ और ए वर्च्यू, अनुमात्रेणापि संबध्यते. द रियलिटी इज नॉट अफेक्टेड, द रोप इज नॉट अफेक्टेड बाय द वर्च्यू or a flaw of what you see in it. Garland has a virtue, the snake has a flaw, let us say, but the virtue of a garland or the flaw of a snake doesn't affect the rope. Yes, because one is a fact, the other is thinking. And between thinking and being there is no similarity. One is the truth, the other is an illusion. They don't have similarity. Thinking about what is different from what is. What is independent of being thought. What is independent of thinking, independent of being thought. And when it is thought this way or that way, that being thought doesn't affect what is. Just as if you are thought of by somebody as this or that, it doesn't affect you. Somebody says you are murkha, you don't become murkha, but yet I react. That is another problem. That is a different problem. That is a problem of reaction, not that really you become a murkha. Somebody says you are a murkha, you don't become a murkha. Because you are only thought so, but you are not so. You are not so. You are only thought so. That is your prarabdham. Take it as prarabdham, you are thought so. If you are not guilty, if the whole world thinks that you are guilty, that is your prarabdham, but it won't make you unhappy. You go through it as prarabdham. Koi baat nahi, you are not reactive. Shanti se silently go through it. When I am not guilty, if the whole world thinks I am guilty, let them. Usko bhi will go through the prarabdham. A person who is truthful goes through silently. He doesn't उसमें react करने की कोई ज़रूरत नहीं. He can try to explain, भैया I am not guilty. He can even go to court and say I am not guilty, बाकी आपका मर्जी. I am telling you I am not guilty. And therefore बाकी आपका मर्जी. If you want to put me somewhere, I will, all right, I will go through it. He is not unhappy. He roughs it out silently. Takes it as prarabdha. Therefore, when you are not guilty, if somebody says you are guilty, you are not going to become guilty. That is. Yatra yadadhyāsaha tatkritena gunena doshena vānumatrena abhisana sambadhyate. Where what is imposed where doesn't affect that. जहाँ जो अध्यास किया जाता है उसको वो कुछ नहीं बिगाड़ता. The snake notion doesn't affect the rope, etc. Similarly, this limitation of the body doesn't become my limitation, the subject's limitation. The flaws of the body do not become the flaws of the self. The non-eternity of the body doesn't become the non-eternity of the subject. Similarly, the thought of blackout doesn't make the existence blackout. Everything, whether it is a thought of a form or a thought of the absence of the form, thought of time, thought of its absence, bhav vritti or abhav vritti, or they don't really affect the subject because they're all, the truth is comprehensive of all the vrittis as itself. Like the space is comprehensive of all the elements as itself. Now, this is the Bhashyaji. This is Bhashyakara is talking. Sir, Your problem is due to adhyasa and the correction of that adhyasa. The problems are not destined. We are not it's not a destiny. Suffering is not a destiny. Suffering is due to confusion. If the society, if the world can understand that suffering is due to self-ignorance, not mere ignorance. It is not sociological ignorance. Suffering is ignorance of the truth. It is not ignorance of hygiene, ignorance of... That is okay, that's all true. It has its unhappiness. Any ignorance gives you some little unhappiness. But the fundamental ignorance, the ignorance about my being is the fundamental cause for suffering. A fundamental reason for suffering. And within that fundamental ignorance, there are so many other things. If I don't know how hygiene, then I get another kind of suffering, the topical suffering. All the topical sufferings are rooted within the fundamental suffering. If I don't know hygiene, then I make mistakes, then I suffer. If I don't know how to talk to my husband, then I talk something and then it makes me suffer. If I don't know how to talk to my wife, that is ignorance. Even ego has to be brought under ignorance. It is ignorance. He just doesn't know. What is it that really that's connected to his happiness? Everybody wants happiness, but he doesn't know the method for it. When a person doesn't know the method for it, he suffers. Thus, unhappiness is not our destiny. Unhappiness is not our destiny. I say, if happiness is our nature, how can unhappiness be our destiny? If freedom is our nature, how can bondage be our destiny? Who is going to write that destiny? Who writes that destiny? How can Bhagavan write a destiny? How can Bhagavan write a destiny of unhappiness on us? हमने उनको क्या बिगाड़ा? भगवान का हमने क्या बिगाड़ा है जी? To write unhappiness as our destiny. This is all really ignorance. Ignorance of the truth. Ignorance of our being is the cause for suffering of all kinds. All kinds. Because the ignorance of the truth prompts us to make all kinds of mistakes. It is the ignorance about the truth that makes us vulnerable and prompts us, compels us to make all kinds of mistakes. And when we make all kinds of mistakes, then they only increase our suffering. Then we make a conclusion, all right, be careful enough not to make mistakes. It is not possible to be careful enough not to make mistakes without being clear about yourself. How much care can you take, Ji? It is like be careful that the snake doesn't strike you. Be careful. How much care can you take? In fact, taking all the time care itself is a strenuous thing. Alertness is strenuous. Alertness is strenuous. Careful. I have to be all the time cautious, vigilant. Cautious, vigilant. It is strenuous stuff. There's some bird. I have got super sensitive ears. Pray. I can even hear the whisper between Obama and his wife. So sensitive. So anything, that is also a kind of a problem, having super sensitive ears. And therefore, be careful not to make any mistakes, you will be happy. You cannot be all careful. You cannot take every care to be right in your life. You cannot take every care to be right every time. It's very, very difficult. It becomes itself a big strain. If you have to be effortlessly non-vulnerable, you have to be comfortable with yourself. You must be clear about your nature. Because there is no need to make mistakes. There is no need to make compromises. There is no need for distractions. There is no need to flout any law. Therefore, when a person is clear about his identity as the all-comprehensive being existing, then you are effortlessly, there is no need, you are not looking for something. When you are looking for something, then you will make mistakes. When you are looking for external happiness, because all our struggle is for happiness, and if that you already have in your heart, then you are not looking for things. You are not trying to extract. And therefore, you cannot take every care to be right every time. Alright, Swamiji, if I get the knowledge of the truth, will I be right every time? I say, there will be no need to be right or wrong. You will be, yes. Alright, you will follow the dharma, which is unambiguous. When I have right knowledge, there is right intention. And to have a right intention, I don't have to be all careful. I don't have to be all alert, all careful, all cautious to have right intention. Therefore, if happiness is our nature, unhappiness cannot be our destiny. Unhappiness felt by us is due to ignorance about our being. There is no doubt about it. Jiva doesn't look at his glory. He's all the time feeding on things. He's most of the time feeding on things. He gets up and starts feeding. He starts feeding. You see, he's all the time thinking about a pleasure. That means what? You are mentally feeding on it. And then there is a physical feeding. So before physical feeding, there is a mentally you are feeding on it. हम जाएंगे, गुड़गांव जाएंगे, वहाँ पर मॉल है, वो मॉल में एक कैंटीन है, वो कैंटीन में बड़ा अच्छा डोसा मिलता है अभी से. Right from now onwards, I am feeding on dosha. Poor dosha. We generally keep feeding on the creation. We think it is a done thing. It is not a done thing or an not done thing. It is ignorance, simple. It is anything that is born of ignorance, and if it is done for a long time, then we say it is a big confusion. It is a done thing, therefore I am justified. No. What is a done thing all over need not be the right thing. Fundamentally, topically it is a done thing. Fundamentally it is ignorance. Simply, at least this much you can pick up. Topically it looks a done thing. Topically it looks a done thing. Yes, it's a done thing. Swamiji sab log karte hain. We all feed on objects. It's a done thing. But fundamentally, it's ignorance. Because you should spend time to look at yourself. You should spend time to look at yourself. Not spend time to feed on things. Spend time to earn and feed on things. Thus, unhappiness is neither karma phalam, not written by destiny, written by God, nor an accident, nor a coincidence. There is no reason for unhappiness except self-ignorance. This must be very clear. And even, unnecessary things that we do at home also make mess of things. Yeah. Again, topically, psychological problems are psychological. Fundamentally, self-ignorance. All, even mental problems can be traced to self-ignorance. Yes. Mental problems, being cruel. Ravana was Ravana. Self-ignorance. He was a devotee, but he was self-ignorant. Ravana is the best example to know how devotion itself doesn't work. How devotion itself. He did not have even devotion really. He was a strategist. Religion was a strategy for him. He worshipped God to get more power so that he could enjoy more. That means there is no devotion. He was a ritualist. Because devotion, I always feel personally, it's a very beautiful word. Devotion to the truth is, it can also never make you can never make you cruel. Devotion brings all the qualities that you require to understand the truth. Yes. Devotion brings all the virtues. That devotion brings God's grace. But I wanted to just, a small correction. Ravana is an example how a ritual is not enough. He was not a devotee really. He was full of rituals. He was into tantra mantra. He was into puja patha. But he didn't have devotion. Because devotion to God implies devotion to dharma. Please. My definition of devotion is, you cannot have devotion. The test of devotion is, if you have devotion to truth, you will respect dharma. You will respect somebody's happiness. You will respect others' happiness. Yes, you will not make others unhappy. You will be fair. Fairness is the effortless result of devotion to God. But he was a great ritualist, but yet he was unhappy. He was self-ignorant. Self-ignorant. He was self-ignorant. Sudama was a devotee, but he had good value. But he was also self-ignorant. I would like to consider him self-ignorant. Listen. Self-ignorant. And therefore, as he derived happiness from his devotion. But personally speaking, in my view, he was still self-ignorant. Self-knowledge is different. Krishna had the vision of his being. Therefore, without self-knowledge, we will always make We are vulnerable. And when we are vulnerable, we will only become unhappy. But the question is, Swamiji, when we have self-knowledge, don't we become vulnerable? We will not be vulnerable to commit. We will not be vulnerable to make mistakes which will make us unhappy. We will not be vulnerable to unhappiness. I will not be vulnerable to tell a lie. Self-knowledge doesn't make one. When there is self-knowledge, one is not vulnerable to tell lies, or to hoodwink others, or to cheat others, or to commit crimes. Then what? That is all vulnerability. What else? Or to show vanity. How dare you say that to me? You have to listen to what I have to say rather than I listen to what you say. ये सब नहीं होगा जी. वो अपना he lives in peace and goes in शांति. शांति से जिएंगे, शांति से जाएंगे. There are no. He doesn't create. A jnani doesn't create waves. Understand? Sounds have waves. Silence doesn't have waves. Silence doesn't create waves. Storms create waves. Waves. Noises create waves. Therefore, thus Bhashyakara says, Sir, when the error doesn't affect the truth, your blissful nature is still intact, your free nature is intact. It will always be intact. Even if you don't know it, it will be the same. It is not that you have to know the truth quickly so that it will not slip away. It's not like that. You have to know that the truth is always available to be known. We say make use of life because once I leave this body, next body I don't know. I mean, the truth itself can't decide which body it is going to take. But then I may have to. And in eternity, what is one more body, two more bodies, three more bodies, four more bodies? It will go on. Okay, ji. Atma anatma dhyāsaha yeva avidya. Let us do some text. Atma anatma adhyasaha. The subject being viewed as the object. Eva avidya is itself called ignorance. Ignorance is not a smoke screen. Ignorance is in the form of a self-error. Due to self-ignorance. This is the whole definition. Self-error due to self-ignorance. Self-ignorance is nothing but self-error. And the self-error is in the form of embodiment. Self-error is this thought, I am a form. I am a human form. This is adhyasa. When a cow says, I am this form, when it behaves that it is a form, it is adhyasa. And minus adhyasa, where is life, ji? This kind of, there is no creation in the truth. It presupposes adhyasa. It is not that there is a truth in the creation. I say the whole creation is rooted in the silence. All sounds are rooted in silence. Silence is not located in sounds. Silence is not located in sounds. Sounds are many, silence is one, indivisible. Silence is indivisible. Sounds are in silence. Silence is not rooted, located in sounds. In that manner. What is avidya? Self-error due to self-ignorance. Quote unquote. You can memorize it. Self-error due to self-ignorance. What is error? I am a form. This is called error. Erroneous perception. Error means erroneous perception about oneself. I perceive myself as a form. This is called erroneous judgment, erroneous perception. The birth itself is erroneous perception. It is a remanifestation of that perception. What is rebirth? Remanifestation of that perception that I am a form. Before birth, it was unmanifest. The perception that I am a form was unmanifest. The perception that I am a form was unmanifest before birth. And what is birth? It is a remanifestation. Remanifestation of that perception that I am a form. That remanifestation is called a rebirth. It is a remanifestation of that era. And a remanifestation will continue. It will again and again remanifest until it is corrected. What else is what else can negate it? I mean, why should it not be very clear? Any error will continue to remanifest until it is corrected. Therefore, rebirth is not a belief. Rebirth is within understandable things. It is understandable. It is not a total belief. It is all wrong. It is not total belief. Shraddheyam does not mean it is merely a total belief. Shraddheyam means it deserves to be believed. Why? Because in the long run it is available for verification. It is Shraddheyam, Shraddha Yogyam. Shraddha Yogyam. Rebirth is Shraddha Yogyam. And Atma being Brahman is Vastu, is a fact. Thus, what is rebirth? You don't have to think, Swamiji, all said and done, do you believe that there is a rebirth? What all said and done? A rebirth is there. You are born now, na? Itne kafi hai. This is a rebirth anyway. You don't believe in rebirth, but you believe in birth, na? I am born. But it's enough. If there can be a birth, there can be a rebirth. What is there? How can it be? How can the repetition of the event impossible? एक बार आप गिर सकते हैं, दोबारा भी गिर सकते हैं. क्या उसमें इम्पॉसिबिलिटी क्या है? Impossibility क्या है? If you can dream once, you can dream again and again also. In fact, every phenomenon repeats itself. Let me tell you, the whole life repeats itself. Waking repeats itself, dream repeats itself, sleep repeats itself, life repeats itself. Our pleasures repeat themselves, pains repeat themselves, our desires repeat themselves. In fact, it is going on. The whole thing is a repetition. That's why life is a chakra. It is a chakra hai. But it is all the time repetitive. Repeats itself. In the morning, you see, you look at the park every day. That's repetitive. You hear the same thing, repetitive. Every day you have upma, repetitive. Sometimes you have daily circles, sometimes you have weekly circles. Once a week upma, that's called a weekly cycle. Once a week dosha, it's a weekly cycle. There are monthly cycles. There are annual cycles. But everything is repeating itself. Please understand, if the whole life is repeating itself, why not the rebirth is nothing but life repeating itself? Life repeating itself is called rebirth. If you want to have great logic for it, I have told you, any error until it is corrected has to remanifest. That is a thinker's statement. Yes, that is a Shastra statement. Therefore, Atma Anatmadhyasaha eva vidya nanu Now let us continue. Shastra. Now the Purvapakshi. Now the present few lines. Just try to grasp. The first few lines. The Purvapakshi says, Sir, this Brahma Sutra, this is an introduction to Brahma Sutras. What we are doing is Adhyasa Bhashya, which is written by Shankaracharya as an introduction to the Bhashya on the Brahma Sutras. Okay? If Adhyasa Bhashya, that means you are starting your commentary on Brahma Sutras with the definition of error, self-error. When the whole topic of Brahma Sutras is the definition of Brahman, when the topic of whole Brahma Sutras is the definition of the unfoldment of Brahman, why did you begin your commentary with Adhyasa? Why did Shankaracharya begin his commentary with defining some kind of a self-error? Why did he not straight away begin the description of the nature of Brahman? Is the objection. This objection is a blessing. Why? Because I must know why am I in need of knowing Brahman? Why am I in need of knowing Brahman? Then I have to be told you are in need of knowing Brahman because lack of knowledge about it is the sole cause of all sufferings. Brahman unknown is ununderstood, is misunderstood. That misunderstanding about Brahman is the sole cause for every suffering. Generally, we think there are too many topical causes. All the two topical causes for unhappiness are also rooted in fundamental cause. The topicals are not parallel to the fundamental. The topical reasons are not fundamental, are not parallel to the fundamental. They are all triggered by the fundamental. Therefore, it is necessary for the commentator to say that, sir, you need to know Brahman because it is the misconception about Brahman that makes you suffer. So, in order to remove that misconception about Brahman, you must have the right knowledge about Brahman. Therefore, you are in need of right knowledge about Brahman. Alright, what if I don't know if I don't have the right knowledge about Brahman? Then you will live with the misconception about the Brahman, about the truth. What if I live on with the misconception? Then you will continue to be unhappy. But you can't say that what if I am unhappy? You can't say because nobody wants to be unhappy. Because it is our need not to be unhappy. It is our only sole need not to be unhappy. Why? Because unhappiness is contrary to our nature, which is peace. Unhappiness is contrary to our nature, which is absolute peace, which is absolute serenity. Therefore, I cannot really remove that unhappiness in me without correcting the misconception about Brahma and the misconception about me when we say it is nothing but misconception about the truth. Self-misconception is nothing but the misconception about the self, the truth. Self-ignorance is not different from the ignorance about the truth. And therefore here the commentators, Bhashyakara has to explain, sir, before we go into then before we try to understand the actual nature of ourselves, we have to explain to ourselves the need to know. The need to know is because if I don't know, because we have the misconception and therefore we are suffering, and therefore in order to remove the misconception, I need to have the right vision about myself. I am in need of the right vision because I am suffering the wrong vision. If my suffering were due to something else, then I don't need the right vision of myself. If my suffering can be traced to something external, then I would not be in need of self-knowledge. Then I have to remove that external cause. If the cause for unhappiness were external, then I should remove that cause. If the cause for my suffering were my own self-misconception, then I have to remove that misconception. And to remove the misconception, I require the right conception, meaning the right vision about the truth. Therefore, before Bhashyakara comments upon the sutras, he writes introduction to show, sir, before you go to know the truth, you better clearly understand that you are only in need of knowledge of the truth, nothing else. Before you go for the knowledge of the truth, be clear that you are indeed in need of the truth. The knowledge of the truth is not one of the feathers in your cap. The knowledge of the truth is all what you need. It's not a unnecessary, a redundant achievement. A redundant achievement. क्या करना उसको? It's like a feather in your cap. क्या करना? In fact, you can't see your own feathers. Others see. All feathers in your cap are for others to see, not for you. You are only carrying the weight of the feathers. क्या करना? But inner happiness is not a feather. That is our need. It's a very. I see a big distinction here. To be alive is our need, is not a feather in our cap. To be happy is our need. To be free is our need. To be clear about ourselves is our need. Brahma, truth, knowing the truth is our need. Vedanta is our need, ji, not a redundant undertaking. It's not some superfluous luxury. It's not a superfluous hobby. It's not like that. It's a need. It's the soul need. Like education is not some superfluous undertaking. It is a very intrinsic, essential need. Like education is an essential need for survival. Self-education is an essential need for inner fullness, inner peace. And therefore, here is the Purvapaksha. See how the doubter says, the objection says, Nanu. Whenever you come across the word Nanu, it means objection starts. Sir, Shastrakarena tavat by Vedavyasa, who wrote all the Brahma Sutras, what did he write? Athato Brahma Jignasa iti. Vedavyasa has written Brahma Sutras, and the first sutra is Athato Brahma Jignasa. Now begins the study about the nature of Brahman. Ataha Brahma Jignasa. Thereafter, therefore, begins the study of Brahman, so that one can know it. Iti brahmajnanaya vicharaha kartavyataya upanyastaha. He says, Vedavyasa began his Brahma Sutras with the first sutra which says, now begins the study of Brahman, and the Brahman needs to be reflected on and understood. He only says, you have to know, you are in need of knowing Brahman. You need to know Brahman, he says. Vedavyasa only says this much, you need to know Brahman, but he doesn't know why you need to know Brahman. Therefore the commentator has to say, why you need to know Brahman. Are you able to follow? Vedavyasa says, you need to know Brahman. You need to know the truth. But I don't know. Why I need to know? Why should I be? One can always say, tell me why I need. Suppose you say you need to know, you need to go to school and get educated. And that they also explain, unless you study, you will not get a job, you will not survive, you will be suffering. Then I say, I see a connection between education and my survival. Therefore, that is the incentive. Happiness is the only incentive. You see? The only trustworthy incentive is happiness. So if I get educated, I can get a job and I can make money and I can be happy, etc., etc. So Vedavyasa only says, sir, you are in need of knowing Brahman. But he doesn't say why. Now here the Purvapakshi says, Vedavyasa Shastrakara only says you need to know Brahman, therefore you should only go about knowing Brahman, and the commentator also should only say you are in need to know Brahman. बस इतना ही बताना चाहिए. शास्त्रस्य च अस्या वेदान्तमीमांसा रूपत्वात्. And all the Brahma Sutras are in the form of, they are analytical of the statements of Vedanta. Vedanta are the Upanishads, which are found in Veda. And those Vedanta Vakyas are analyzed by Brahma Sutras. That is why Brahma Sutras are otherwise called Vedanta Mimamsa. Shastrasya chasya Vedanta Mimamsa Rupatvat Vedanteshu cha Brahma Vidapnoti Param Tarati Shokamatma Vidityadishu Brahma Vidyayaha eva Purushartha Hetutva Kathanat. And what do the Upanishads say? Brahma Vidapnoti Param says if you come to know Brahman, you will get moksha. Tarati Shokam Atmavit, and you will be happy by knowing Atma. You will cross the ocean of samsara. You will cross the ocean of samsara. You will cross the ocean of struggle. You will cross the ocean of unhappiness by knowing yourself. Upanishads say, Taradishokam Vidithyadishu Brahma Vidya. And therefore that means Brahma Jnanam can give me moksha. If Brahma Jnanam can help me tide over unhappiness, then all that I require is only Brahma Jnanam, nothing else. Therefore even commentator has to begin with the definition of Brahman. Why are you wasting time talking about Adhyasa? Why are you wasting time talking about Adhyasa? You should straight away begin the description of Brahman. And therefore Brahma Vidyayaha eva Purushartha Hetutva Kathanat sa eva Brahma Vidya Pradarshitavya Bhashakarena. So here the Purvapakshi says Bhashakara should have begun his commentary with the description of the nature of Brahman. Why is he saying there is a problem called Adhyasa? Why should he say you are suffering, there is a Adhyasa, there is Atma and Atma Adhyasa, this embodiment is due to Adhyasa, this embodiment is due to self-confusion, etc., etc. Why is he talking about Adhyasa? Tadatra prasaktam vidya pratipadanam vihaya kimidam aprasaktam adhyasasya lakshana sambhavanadi nirupanam iti chet. Hey, why is the commentator Bhashyakara talking about the definition of adhyasa confusion? He is defining, instead of defining straight away the truth, he is defining what is an error. Oh my God. He is defining an error, lakshanam. And he is also defining, he is also saying the error is possible. He is talking in terms of the possibility of self-error. He is talking in terms of the definition of a self-error. And he is spending so much of time in the very introduction describing the nature of self-error, describing the possibility of the self-error. He is talking about the lakshanam, he is talking about the sambhavana of adhyasa rather than straight away going into the definition of Brahman. When we are in need of Brahmajnanam, we should begin with Brahmajnanam. Why this talking? That I am the body, is self-confusion, vagera, vagera, vagera. Why leave the truth and get into confusion? Are you doing Brahma Vichara or confusion Vichara? Adhyasa Vichara or Brahma Vichara? Iti Purvapaksha, for which the Siddhanta says, Naisha dosha. Sir, it is not wrong on the part of the commentator Bhashyakara Shankaracharya to straight away tell us what is our problem. Definition of Brahman is the answer. But before I go for that answer, I must know what is my problem. So in the introduction, Bhashyakara explains to us what is the problem. The problem is there is misconception about the self, the Brahman. There is misconception about the self, the Brahman. And it is that misconception about the self, the Brahman, that is the sole cause for all samsara. All sufferings, even topical problems are rooted in that fundamental cause. Don't say that is okay, Swamiji, self-ignorance in Kapana Sthan hai, lekin ye bhi there. Theek hai ji, but then they're all, you need to work and make money. Your need for money also is rooted in self-ignorance, I am telling you. Why? Because the need for money is rooted in survival. Survival means embodiment. Embodiment is rooted in only. And therefore, Shastra doesn't really solve one of the causes of unhappiness. Shastra solves the sole cause for us. Naisha dosha. Why? There is no flaw? Listen patiently another 2 minutes, then we will go. Adhyasa nirupanasya eva prasakta taratvat. What is a closer context is to tell man his problem. Adhyasa prasaktasya, adhyasa nirupanasya. Pointing out a human problem is indeed a closer need, is indeed prasakta tara. Prasakta tara means is the real context. Talking about adhyasa is not out of context. Talking about adhyasa is very much within context. Whereas the Purvapakshi says, talking about Brahman is within context, but talking about self-confusion is out of context. Siddhanta says, no, it is in fact more than in context. It is more. It is talking about adhyasa that is more within context. Because without knowing exactly what is my problem, I cannot look for an answer. It will be a blind, superstitious pursuit. It won't. Without knowing the problem, even if you study Vedanta, you can't sustain it. You will leave it. It is only when I study Vedanta to solve a particular problem which I am very clear about. Then until I solve that problem, I will not leave Vedanta. If I don't know why I need to know myself, why I need to study Vedanta, if I don't know, out of just, certain flair for spiritual literature, I may study Vedanta and I will give it up after a couple of years. This is not a flair for spiritual literature. इसमें कुछ आनंद होता है थोड़ी देर. But I don't know why. Hello. People go to the temple, why they just a flair. You understand flair? Flair means, अच्छा लगता है, okay? Flair. चलो जी थोड़ा घूम के आएंगे मार्केट में, फ्लैर. नॉट दैट यू आर इन नीड ऑफ इट. कुछ नहीं है, ऐसे है थोड़ा मजा आएंगे. फ्लैर. Some kind of flair. What is the synonym of flair? It gives you some kick. It gives you some kick. So if you study Vedanta just for a kick, and then later on really you will leave it. You will leave it. If I know why exactly I am studying Vedanta, why should one be studying? Why should one study Vedanta? If I know, then I will not leave it until I solve the problem. Once I know this is my essential need, it is not my flair, it is not my interest, it is not my spiritual inclination, it is my need. Unless I see that it is my need, it is everybody's need. In fact, it is everybody's soul need. Then you will not leave Vedanta until you meet that need, until you understand it. Therefore, in India, if somebody becomes a Vedanti, please understand, it could be out of flair, it could be out of curiosity, it could be out of great understanding. But the commentator, Bhashyakara, he writes, sir, you need to know your problem, and your problem is Adhyasa. You are living a self-confusion. All looks well, but it is confusion. Consistency in the confusion gives it a sense of order. Any consistency creates a sense of order. You see. It's like a consistency in the dream makes it look orderly. Continuity. We always use continuity as validity. Because it continues, it's more valid. If it doesn't continue, we think it's not valid. But its confusion also can continue. Thus, Siddhanta is going to answer this. Explaining, defining our problem, pointing out our problem is more in context than the Brahma Jignasa. In fact, equally, it's not more. We are in need of the answer. We are also in need of knowing what the problem is. Therefore, it is the genius of that person, this commentator, Shankaracharya's genius, which makes him first tell humanity the problem. It's not. Brahmajnanam is not another branch of knowledge like you have physics and chemistry, this, that. So similarly there is a spiritual knowledge. It comes and joins the mess in the mind. You have got so many details, and this is also another detail. This is the sole problem, and therefore there is no harm. We'll continue it. Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.